Hey everyone, welcome to Strange Stories, where we explore near-death experiences and supernatural stories from people who've had a glimpse of the other side. If you enjoy our content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. Without further ado, let's get to the story of the day. I was being divorced after 19 happy years of marriage and a disastrous 20th year, which I confess was my fault. At the same time, I was building a house for myself and painting the interior woodwork, crown molding, fireplace mantle, window surrounds, and so on with highly hazardous lacquer. During this period, I was on significant pain meds after several back surgeries, much of which I self-administered, with my dosage taken as needed to manage pain as I saw fit. My doctor imposed no restrictions on me and prescribed the drug of my choosing. There were no rules to deter painkillers in 1996, so it's safe to say I made sure I didn't feel any pain. I didn't pursue them for fun, but when you work 6 days a week for more than 10 hours a day, that's not a plausible assertion given the high use factor. Even though I was aware of the risks, I didn't take pain relievers until the discomfort was unbearable. Prior to my experience, I was a devout Christian until I started taking pain medicine. Yes, I had read a lot of Walter Martin's material and was aware that drugs and alcohol lose your conscious mind to other energies, making you subject to evil influences. I have unwittingly developed the habit of using Satan's name in vain. I was always upset when I heard others do such things to God and His Son Jesus, so I devised my own method of bringing Satan's reputation into disrepute. Certainly not a good idea, but I was young and lacked the necessary knowledge. My children went to a Christian school, and I considered myself a devout Christian, frequently seeking God's word and imparting those principles in my family's lives. I strove to always put God first and protect my family from any damage that might come their way in an ungodly environment. My marriage dissolved, and the church I attended disintegrated as a result of wicked forces assaulting the amazing job God had accomplished via a faithful pastor. In retrospect, I was really vulnerable and, strangely, did not receive assistance from fellow Christians, with the exception of one guy who, had he persisted, might have moved me away from the path I was on. My near-death experience in the vacuum has taken me over 2 decades to accept and discuss, even with my daughter who rescued me. I had no idea of NDEs in the domain known to others as the void at the time. While it answers many things, the dread I had upon visiting the memories was as if it happened yesterday. The fear sensations returned and were so strong that I couldn't even think about it, let alone do any research. As we all know, there are always ramifications to our actions. Unfortunately, as in my case, culprits do not always pay the price for their own wrongdoing. My children were left without the leadership and protection of a God-fearing father, vulnerable to the darkness that this world abounds in. My children have suffered in faith and direction as a result of a rogue spiritual leader. God gifted me with 4 extraordinary children, and I failed myself, God, and my children as a good Christian family leader, as God has commanded us to be. They are suffering the price for my failure, which is almost unbearable in and of itself. This is something I have to deal with on a regular basis. It took me several years to regain my faith in God. When Satan destroys a person, he can be brutal. Apart from my wife of 20 years, I was painting enormous woodwork in my own personal property. Crown molding, a fireplace mantle, and specialist wood trim were all present. I was using a really hazardous lacquer compound. For nearly 20 years, I worked as a designer or builder, therefore painting was nothing new to me. Working long hours was normal for me because I had a strong work ethic. I had emptied the first 5-gallon bucket when I began priming the wood and was still not completed with the first primer layer. I emptied the second 5-gallon bucket and started spraying. When I opened the second bucket, I had been spraying for almost an hour and a half. I finished my primer coat after about another 30 minutes. Upon closer scrutiny, I discovered that the second can had been incorrectly labeled. It was the lacquer final coat, not primer. This bothered me since I would have to sand and re-prep the incorrect trim in order to reapply primer. I was wearing a respirator with a half-hour carbon cartridge life expectancy, but I had already been spraying for 2 hours. I took more pain medicine to allow me to continue working and worked extremely quickly, irritated with the paint company for their error, which cost me a lot of extra effort. After a while, I became quite fatigued. I remember thinking I'd just lay down and take a quick nap before returning to work. The air in the house was extremely hazardous, but I didn't give it any thought. In my haste to finish the project, I forgot to update the filter. I remember laying down on the floor between the internal doors. The combination of pain relievers and poisonous gases had engulfed me. I should have known better, but I was on my way to another world. Then I remember seeing my body curled up on the floor. Surprisingly, it had no emotional impact and was completely unimportant. I didn't think twice about it. I appeared to be a few feet over the top of the ceiling, possibly 25 to 30 feet. But this was insignificant given the little importance. I felt like I was drifting, but it wasn't because of anything I did. My thoughts were clear and my senses were sharp, yet my bewilderment overpowered me. It's natural to think I was dreaming, but I felt so awake and alert. No, I wasn't in a dream state, though it would have been preferable. Dreams go away. I was not aware of going from here, but I had reached a dark region. This increased my worry and anxiety. I recollect feeling as if roots were reaching me, as if I were entrenched in the earth below ground level. I was completely encircled. I couldn't see myself or anything else since the darkness was so dense. But I was terrified and didn't want to. As I became aware of the blackness surrounding me, my fear turned to terror. I couldn't move, speak, or call for help because I was terrified in complete darkness. I was acutely conscious of my predicament. My senses seemed to be heightened, yet I was bewildered and unaware of what was going on. I didn't even bother to examine it because I was absorbed with the immediate horror within me. I found myself in absolute darkness again after entering a little different dimension, but the sensation of roots approaching me had been replaced by beings approaching me. They were initially far away, but as they got closer, they seemed to proliferate. They approached me, seemingly slowly but steadily, and coming at me from all directions. My terror had paralyzed me, and I was acutely aware that they seemed to know where I was. I realized they were human-like beings and noticed their skin brushing against itself as they neared. The skin appeared thick and rough, with a gray hue. I'm not sure how I knew, but I had a vivid memory of their appearance. They were naked, but it didn't matter given the state of horror I was in. The panic was considerably more than I had imagined conceivable at the moment, but the experience overwhelmed me with worry and incomprehensible fear. Even though time didn't matter, it felt like a long time had passed, and all I could think about was pure sorrow. I lost consciousness thinking and found myself returning to my body, awakening the next morning, just as it appeared the creatures had reached me. I couldn't remember how I arrived in my bed at home, but the sensation and awareness of my experience were so clear and present. Unlike dreams, the memory is as vivid as it was when it occurred, complete with horror. I preferred not to talk about it or acknowledge it, even to my daughter, who had intervened to save my life. My research and current understanding, with the help of my Lord, have clarified how God's hand has safeguarded me. Even though I abandoned him to pursue less than respectable objectives, it's difficult to doubt that he still loves me. Now I realize I've entered what many refer to as the emptiness. God intervened by notifying my daughter that I needed assistance. She hurried to my aid and, upon discovering me and my situation, went on to seek assistance from another individual. This was an extremely unlikely event in and of itself, but it confirms God's hand in my salvation. In a more recent event, I was launching my sport boat when I slipped into the chilly Alaska waters alone and without my life jacket. I simply forgot to wear it. I was in a rush. I was unable to cling on the 5 or 8 inch buoy line I was clutching onto after around 12 to 15 minutes of frantic attempts to get myself out of the water. Every time I tried to reposition myself in a better position, I would sink and battle to re-grab the buoy line, but the cold and tiredness sapped my power and vitality. I was convinced I was going to drown. There was no one around, and I had just gotten off my boat and seen no one in the late afternoon. I remember telling God that I didn't want to die like this. Then I heard a voice tell me to call for aid. Only once, but there was certainly a voice. I answered by proclaiming it was a bad idea and explaining why. My voice was barely inaudible after neck surgery. The engine was running, and no one could possibly hear me because no one was there. One does not quarrel with their own thinking and problem-solving talents, but one does dispute with what another person perceives as a bad notion, as I did. I knew I didn't have a minute left in me. I remembered my family, but I couldn't hold on any longer. Deanna then gazed over the dock's edge. I was taken aback. What happened to her? I had just gotten on my boat and could see for at least 5 minutes in any way. Even if someone had stood 5 feet away from me, I doubt they would have heard me. I'm certain that God exists and is always willing to assist us when we ask. My experiences are not unlike to those of others who have prayed and witnessed God's hand perform miracles, but it strengthens my resolve to remain committed to my faith. I took so many chances when I wandered. Now, I can't get enough of God's word or perceive Him as anything other than my hope and salvation.